And welcome to the Josh and Tyler Show. It's me, your friendly neighborhood Josh, and I'm here with Tyler's with two F's for fucking fantastic YouTube critic, and also appearing. If you haven't seen our episode of Improv, check that out. That went up Monday. Today is Friday, so you can check that out. We're talking about. It was a good time. We had some good laughs, but today,
quite the
Oscar
opposite.
live action shorts. Tyler, what are your general thoughts on these?
You know what? My thoughts keep changing every 5 minutes, but the one thing I think you and I can really agree upon was that the animated shorts were considerably so much better because, for one, they didn't spell out the message of their story, which is kind of the problem I had with short films to begin with. They're either like really silent and up to imagination, and those ones are truly the best. And then there are the ones that are basically like half-hour long movies that you would see in any other movie theater that aren't bad by any means, because there are plenty of good ones in these categories. It's just there were so many times where, like, not even 5 minutes in, you already know what this movie is about. You know what the message is. Hell, half of these have basically the exact same message.
Yeah, a lot of them absolutely do. So there were 5 animated shorts that come to a runtime of 2 hours and 10 minutes. I thought that when I was going through this, honestly, I thought, oh, there's like an honorable mention or a couple that didn't make it at the end. Nope. It's just all the normal ones. Because usually there's usually one that just didn't make the cut in here, usually for the last couple of years. But some of these are longer than others. So yeah, so the first one that we start off with is present. Now, initially I thought this was the present time, dealing with immigration and border politics and such. But this is about a man and his daughter trying to buy a fridge in Palestine, and it's all about race relations between the Palestinians and the Arabs. Now, this is personally my favorite. This one is the most well shot on the list. Did the best sound edited. The cart has a very significant sound. I like the way it sounds. I like the way the fridge opens and creaks. I like the small details. I felt like nothing in this short was left to chance. Everything was dialed down. Everything went through an edit. Everything was meant to be as it was to be in here. Every reaction shot, this is the best possible version of this short film. Even if you got Spielberg in it, he wouldn't re-edit this one. I really like the characters. I like the father a lot, but the daughter, Miriam Kanj, I'm mispronouncing your name, but phenomenal. I really like her reactions in it. As much as it was predictable for the ending that the daughter was going to push the fridge through the Arab section of the border, it still got me. It still got me that this daughter was just like, I just want to get home. And I like the subtlety of that she couldn't find a washroom in time. I like the pacing as well. The pacing is very, very quick and brilliant. I like the isolation they have pushing up and down a road. I like that she's just the small moments of her just looking at these birds and the birds say nothing. Those are very silent birds, by the way. I don't know if you've ever owned birds, but birds, they make noise. I think this is perfectly shot, pitch perfect from beginning to end. Just wow. This was my favorite one of all. And I like that we didn't get the ending of the fridge at the house. I like that it's just, here's the end, they walk off. I like the ambiguousness of this. I hate the border guards because I don't see what their problem with this guy is. But we're meant to. Just wow. I think this wins. In my heart, this wins best live action short. Now, my heart doesn't predict the results. I think I know which one will win on here, but we will see. What are your thoughts on present?
The present was definitely a great start to this category. I love the visual style that, and I'm going to try and get this director's name right, Farah Nabulsi.
That sounds
Hopefully I got that right. I love the visual style that she uses, where she features so many shots of staircase rails, gates, windows that all have bars to make our main character Youssef and his daughter Yasmin feel as if they're prisoners in their own country, given the circumstances that they are in. In fact, there's an entire scene where Youssef wakes up from some random street in the middle of the night because it really takes that long to walk from one location to another just to do the most mundane things. There's a shot where he and hundreds of others are like all crowded and they're
Mhm.
trying to go for that border. That was an improvised shot. All of those
Oh,
people were not movie extras. They were actually real life workers getting up at the crack of dawn to doing their job. Some of them are willing to follow the rules and huddle up with each other and over crowds. Some of them are like literally crawling on the staircase rails. And, chances are, if any of them even recognized that they were on camera, I'm not sure that they would care, considering if life is
yeah.
that shitty and you have much more important priorities to focus on. Either way, it's still a really great shot that sets the atmosphere and still adds this really awesome element of realism to it. And I mean, there were plenty of moments that, even though this wasn't really an eventful movie because there isn't a ton of action, the suspense is mostly in between the conversations between Yusef and the border patrol guards and a couple
Mhm.
other people that he faces. There were so many moments where I could actually feel my heart pounding because the officers themselves are very nuanced in their expressions and their body language when they are being incredibly racist towards this individual. They're really making him take his time. They're kind of getting off on it at that point. And it's just insane that this is a story about Yusef and Yasmin having to cross a checkpoint for the most mundane thing. In this case,
Mhm.
they're going to get the mom of the family a fridge as an anniversary present just because theirs is absolute shit.
Yo,
And
that's a bad
I mean, it's hard to tell if
fridge.
it is legitimately hard to tell if the soldiers in this are just doing their duty or if they're being a complete dick. Because during the finale, where you think you know where it's going to go because the father Yusef is freaking out and the officers are drawing their weapons because he is making a scene, but in between there's like a senior and a junior going, what are you doing? This is such a complete waste of time. Why are we talking about this? And it's just like, well, isn't this our protocol? Like, what the hell's going on? I really like how subdued and nuanced the short is, because even if you don't know about the occupation in the West End, you can still piece apart together like who's a majority, who's a minority, who really has the power within a given scene. Because when they're waiting in the checkpoint and Yasmin is looking through the gate as if she's literally locked up, she sees a car of Arabs pass through the border, and the guards are just like, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" Like stuff that you and I would probably be more used to if we were going for a border patrol.
Yeah.
It was a really great start to the show. I do like the sound design is pretty good. I hadn't actually thought of that. I was too busy looking at other implications, like how Yusef is constantly looking at his pill bottle for his back pain. You wonder if he got those drugs legally or not. They don't necessarily say. In fact, they make the case that the opening shot he was going to get those pills from someone else to begin with. And there's that whole scene where we do see the fridge and we see him, but when he opens it, we don't see what he actually puts in there, which makes the final border crossing scene a lot more suspenseful. Because whether these guards were racist or not, like, you're bringing a giant fridge for a border patrol, why wouldn't you check it? I mean, I've seen border patrol shows, border patrol reality shows, because my parents are really big fans of those. And even though those officers are dicks, the show makes it incredibly clear they're only dicks because they've seen people act like complete assholes when it comes to this shit. So there is an element of understanding, but still an element of complete distrust towards one another. And when they do open up the bag and it is the wet pants, I just sat there. I'm like, did he hide something in those wet pants to like mask anything? Because it just seems, if it was, that would be a really convincing trick, but it would also be for a completely understandable purpose. He's a minority. He doesn't have access to proper health care. And there are just so many. It is probably the most ambiguous short within the entire catalog. And for that reason alone, it's definitely worth checking out.
And it is actually the shortest on the list. It's the shortest, but it comes
Really?
in about 22 minutes. The
Huh.
other ones come in at 28 to 32. Um, but I think it actually paints the best story. It has the best pacing, the best editing, the best lighting. It gives us from beginning to end without telling us too much. I think it's honestly the best short on this list. If one of these wins, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
I don't know. I actually like the second short. The second short, Feeling Through, is actually my personal favorite of the five.
So what did you think of Feeling Through?
Well, it has such a simple story, but it's told in such a beautiful and unique fashion. For those who don't know, Feeling Through is about a homeless kid, or at least it's implied that he's homeless because the
Hmm.
opening shot is him like texting friends asking if he can crash at their place. So it kind of leaves it out in the open whether or not he actually is homeless or whether he's a runaway. It's not explicitly clear. It could be either one, but after he's done hanging out with his friends, he comes across this deaf-blind individual named Artie, who is very patiently waiting at a crosswalk to try and get to a bus stop. And from there on, Tariq very reluctantly and in some cases against his own better judgment decides to spend the majority of this night helping out Artie. And the two of them, in ways that I'm about to get into, find a way to actually have conversations and learn about each other and ultimately become friends. I really like that in the opening shot when we establish what Tariq's lifestyle is. The cinematography features a lot of wide shots that accomplish two things. The first is make it seem like we're actually on the streets that he is, and we're just watching from like across the street as if we're pedestrians or civilians actually seeing a homeless person go from one location to another. And it also makes us really feel the isolation and loneliness that he's experiencing, which is something that he manages to find common ground with Artie. And I also really like the fact that the movie's not afraid to make it clear that we do make mistakes when we come into contact with people like Artie, and especially in his case. Like, how many of us can safely say that we've learned right away how to get along with a blind or a deaf person, let alone get along with a deaf blind person all at once? So they leave in a lot of scenes where Tariq starts to make contact with him, starts talking, and then he's just like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, seriously. But he's also smart. He's quick on his feet and he's able to learn from these exact same mistakes. And he comes up with very creative ways to start talking to him, like when Artie does reach out for his hand, and Tariq very wisely starts to imprint the letters of the alphabet to form sentences. And the director does the very, very wise decision to like trace out the letters on screen as if he's actually writing it out so we can see. It's a technique that you normally associate with like people receiving a text message in a movie like the opening did, but I always find it more I always find it more visual and subtle when people actually show their writing on screen as if it's just completely spontaneous. I think it's a really great effect. And in my opinion, it's the most ambiguous in regards to the character development because with Tariq, as I said before, you don't really know if he's homeless because he was dealt the wrong cards in life or if he's a runaway because life was that difficult, but he doesn't know how to completely address others. And he's also a difficult character to like at the very beginning because as much as he's willing to ask for help from other people, he's not willing to do so towards others. When he's grabbing groceries for someone, he does slip he does slip some money from their wallet in front of other people, which that was weird. And it also gave me the impression that there was going to be a cop character because I mean, given the circumstances, the fact that it's like wee hours Manhattan, it just seems a given. But thankfully, that didn't happen. But I do like that when he comes across a person who, weirdly enough, has worse life circumstances than he does, it really puts his life into perspective. And if it was established that he is actually homeless, that probably would have been a bad decision. But since they leave it up to imagination, it works a hell of a lot more as a lesson. And for Artie to be a very surprisingly good mentor figure just by being himself. Because as I was watching the short, I didn't really know what to make of Artie because dude only has a notepad and a pen to really convey any communication. And when you do see his face, it's often the exact same monotone expression. But in my opinion, it works a hell of a lot better because based on the stuff that he's had to learn in order to live his life, he has to be a very patient and understanding toward he has to be very patient and understanding towards people who don't instantly get him, but he is still incredibly optimistic that people can understand what he's going through and relate to him. And he seems very appreciative based on the fact that there is that one moment where he blurts out a sentence and you do realize he's a lot smarter than people give him credit for. There's so much left to imagination. I love the way director Doug Roland visually compelled the story. It's one of the few times where I can safely say I like handheld camera work because it does feel like a fly on the wall type of documentary. And you can definitely tell that they ask people from the deaf community how to convey these types of messages, because Marley Matlin and her interpreter Jack Jason are actually two of the producers with this short. And I just sat there and I'm like, that's good. I like that. But yeah, I love the character study between Tariq and Artie. I do love the visual aesthetic where it's gritty, but it's not oversold. And it's so much more subtle and nuanced compared to some of the other shorts that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it is a lot subtler. The one thing that I notice is the excellent use of backgrounds. They're very busy or graffitied, and they complement the simple story. I appreciate that we see a lot of stuff going on in the background, but in the foreground, very little is happening. He's waiting for the bus. He's receiving a text. He's trying to find a place to stay. They're complaining about 50 cents for a drink, etc. I will say that the camera work is not my favorite on this. I do think the camera is 100% simplistic, and I understand it needs to be simplistic to tell a simple story of two people. And I understand that the shots linger to sort of paint the mundane. But I feel like every shot is either not as well framed as it could be and lingers for about maybe 5 seconds long. That's my biggest critique of the short. Because it was just because I like the opening, I like the text on screen. That's pretty clever. I've seen that before, but I think it was well done. I like the text and such. I like that when he wrote "same" when he says, "Are you going on a date?" They didn't show the text. It's just a laugh. It's the reaction. We let the audience do that. I really like Tariq and Artie's dynamic here, and just when he gives him a hug at the end is a really, really nice moment. That always gets you. I wrote the note was tears, maybe question mark, and then there's a stop. But I just the camera work is way too simplistic for me. I don't think the cinematographer was apt for this job. I don't love the way it paints the picture because the camera is a character. The camera should be painting Tariq by himself as loneliness. It does so a little bit, but it could do it so much better. It should paint the two of them together as this sort of warm lighting area and use the exterior bus stops and maybe change that bulb out for a different color just to sort of bring that in there. But the cinematographer, I think it was just a camera guy, not a cinematographer, because it doesn't really, every shot feels the same for me with the lighting and the sound and the camera. It's more about the characters, yes, but I want the camera to be a character so it can enrich the experience. Because if you watch any movie or any short, the camera and the lighting is integral to creating those moments. There were moments I should have felt. The moments where they're sitting around the bench, he's complaining about 50 cents for a drink, they're eating, they're doing that. The lighting did not convey a little bit of happiness, a glimmer of hope. It just conveyed the same thing everything else did in the other thing. And maybe that's just me breaking it down from a technical standpoint. I like the concept, but I don't love the technical directing. I just don't think it's up to point.
That's fair. I didn't really feel that way. In fact, I had more problems with the cinematography for like something like Nomadland, because that was the one critique I had, my favorite movie of that year. But there were shots that really portrayed the characters like this, where it was a lot more choppy. And I think this did it a hell of a lot better, because what I was saying about Tariq hanging out with his friends and they're all in frame, but it still feels incredibly isolated. There were moments like that. And plus, whenever Tariq and Artie are in the same frame, they're a lot closer together. So the camaraderie still shows without any talking whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I know they were going for that, but I felt like they could have done it more effectively. I just think that this
Oh,
person,
no, that's fair.
the
That's fair.
cinematography isn't as experienced as they could have been. And cinematography means lights, camera, and sound. You're in charge of making the technical aesthetic feel.
I don't know if sound's really their job,
but it goes in there. They want to know where the boom is placed, and they want to know this and that. And I didn't feel
okay, yeah.
The streets. They didn't use wind effectively as some. There's one short on here. For example, in Present, when you went to the empty streets to paint the loneliness, you could still hear the rattling of the fridges and the wind blowing, which was incredibly effective. And there was just really, really good layered in sound design, which I think you could have done. You could have had the background people on the bus. You could have had cars rolling by and other things in these sort of, and add echoes, and you could have really added.
Well, don't forget who one of the main characters is. I mean, it's about us trying to experience something that we haven't done before. Like when he has that Sound of Metal moment and he just closes his eyes and closes his ears, like that pretty much sums up why I didn't miss the sound design. There are some movies where sound design is important in conveying the deaf experience, like The Tribe, where there are no subtitles, no translations whatsoever. And it just makes everything from like footsteps, opening doors, them moving around their arms and clapping, or even when they're speaking, but they just don't even realize it. It's movies like that where I feel like it's more important for the sound design. But when it's like a hearing character trying to understand what a deaf person goes through, I don't really care about the sound design all that much. That's just a personal thing.
Well, this
for
is
me.
why I care about the sound design. If you paint those city streets, the rattling the hubcaps, dogs barking in the background, people painting, think of how effective that is when he puts his hands over his ear and all the sound goes away. You notice the difference. If there's no sound to begin with, that
Yeah, but I
moment,
noticed the difference too.
it doesn't hit as hard for me because of the technical, but still I like the story. So
That's
yeah.
fair. Yeah.
Our next short is, I think this is the one we didn't like. I believe.
And you know what? People who are still watching are just like, oh, gee, I wonder what the fucking problem is. Hear us out on this.
Yeah, so
Hear
let's
us out on
talk
this.
about two distant strangers. We meet our main character. He wakes up at this one night stand he had. He leaves the house talking about his dog, and police brutality happens on the street. After he dies from being choked out by a cop, saying he can't breathe, paralleling the events of the previous year, it happens again and again and again and again. Now, as I think the short is objectively an interesting topic to talk about, it is social commentary. I think it drags on a little too long. And I can see what the director is trying to do by painting this picture saying, look, this happens every day. It is long. But then I get that sort of blow in my face, like punch by the media constantly telling me murders are happening, even though murders are decreasing, telling me racism is happening, even though racism is now being addressed. And I feel like it's being decreased maybe 1%. There's 1% of people who realize if someone is truly racist, they're not going to change. And I think this short, we have to be very careful what we say on this. I think this short does use time effectively. I think it uses the police brutality and does bring honor to the victims. But I felt like it should have ended about 4 times. I felt like racism should have ended 50 years ago. So why are we still talking about this? Can we not just go end racism instead of and that sounded bad coming out. But
don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
The thing is, if we portray racism on screen, it needs to be handled well. I think this was handled well for the first half. I think drawing parallels to people's lives that were quite short may not have been the best thing to do. I think fictionalizing it to relate to the audience. Because here's the thing. If you're doing a short on racism or depression or someone who's an alcoholic, and you make it so it's so real for them, they are going to tune out. Anyone who doesn't agree with the topic is already tuned out after 5 minutes because they disagree with your point of view. You are now hitting people who are affected by this and making them worse than saddened because you are affecting them to think about what has happened when they're trying to move on, trying to be more respected in their community, trying to do other things, trying to overcome racism by adding more hints of racism without an air of hope. I would have liked to see an air of hope in this. I would have liked to see this cop have a change of heart at the end. I really, truly think that would have been a better ending because we're trying to stop people from hating. We're trying to stop hate. We're trying to stop Asian hate. We're trying to make Black Lives Matter. We're trying to make Me Too actually not just about white women. I'm sorry, I had to
That's okay, Bill Burr.
We're trying to end this. So ending this on a negative point paints reality, yes. But does it also say that there is no end to the cycle and does not provide hope? It does that as well. Tyler, what are your thoughts?
You know what? Usually whenever this type of topic enters into a conversation of mine, I always go to this one interview of Anthony Mackie back when he did this movie called Black or White, which is a courtroom drama about Kevin Costner and Octavia Spencer fighting for custody over their granddaughter. And since the granddaughter is biracial, like Octavia Spencer's one side and Kevin Costner's the other side of the family, it raises a lot of questions. And Anthony Mackie is Octavia Spencer's attorney, who has to deal with the fact that the child's father is an ex-con drug addict who was responsible for the mother's death. And there's one point where Mackie's character says, "You are a stereotype," and this is really what's dragging things out. But there's an interview for that movie that sums up the reason I had such a problem with the short to begin with. Mackie literally says, "If the police pull me over, come up to my window, flashlight in my face, hand on their pistol, I can handle it two ways. Start yelling and screaming at him, telling him he's a racist, or I can say, 'Yes, officer,' 'No, officer,' 'Are we done, officer?' And both of them are going to have drastically different outcomes. If I'm going to fight a police officer, I'm going to fight him in a controlled environment, a court of law. I'm not going to fight him on the streets." Our main character has so many opportunities where that exact point that you just made about being able to have a conversation and open dialogue to find out why this hatred exists in people to begin with, how we can combat that, how we can make these events happen significantly less. But he doesn't. He spends the majority of these death scenes resisting, screaming at and yelling at him, making a scene, and running away. And I'm sorry, but there's no excuse for this. It makes him look guilty even when he's innocent. And that was the main reason that I couldn't really relate to him as a character, because I just couldn't see how he would rationalize these scenarios. And even in the last 5 minutes, where the girlfriend, who I just want to say, the girlfriend as comic relief did not work whatsoever. She was way too cliched of a millennial character. She fits that stereotype where characters in movies and shows have to blurt out their race and their gender as if we seriously didn't know that about them, which that's a completely different conversation in and of itself. But even in the last 5 minutes, where he does finally decide that now is the time to start having a conversation with the police officer during that, what is probably our favorite scene, when they're in the car and they're talking to each other.
I did have pacing issues with this scene. I felt like it was too choppy. It didn't make a lot of sense. I would have liked to see one smooth 1 minute chunk of dialogue without movement, because we've been moving this whole short. I would have liked to see that still moment, that moment of understanding, because I do believe that everyone cannot be a terrible person. You have to make that choice. And that's the moment when he could have made that choice.
Yeah, but like, and you know, the other problem with that scene is that they don't really examine the police officer. They have that one sense where it's just like, I got tired of being bullied, so I wanted to put them away. It's just like, that could mean anything. This is one of the few times where a character's backstory really shouldn't be left up to imagination, because that really could mean a lot of things. And when it comes to police officers who do kill unarmed people for no reason, we do kind of need to understand what this person went through in their lives to become such a complete, insane, and utter moron. But they don't even take the time to address that. But yeah, like the one time where this main character does make the right decision to start having a conversation and an open dialogue, conversations we should be having right now, the movie does make that ridiculous bait and switch where they do realize that this cop is beyond reasoning, which I guess was their idea of trying to say that there are some cops who just aren't going to be repentant, which you flat out said, and I will flat out say. But my problem is this short tends to generalize our main character as like every Black person in America, and the cop from Perry Mason, because that's who he is, and it took us a while to really realize
you pointed that out. So
yeah, but like I even went through his filmography and I didn't even realize it until The Voice clicked with me. That cop is kind of supporting this idea. He's supposed to represent in this story every police officer, maybe even in New York City, because it makes it clear that it's NYPD. And it's just such a cheap, as much as the short is telling us that like cops are operating based on stereotypes, this entire short has stereotypes. The stereotypical millennial girlfriend and the stereotypical racist cop. And you don't really examine either of these things. It's just so insufferable. And as you just pointed out, this movie really hits itself over the head with the message, right down to replicating real life incidents of police brutality as if it's complex or clever, which it really isn't. I mean, anyone could. I get that there's a lot more fear and pressure from the cast and the crew to replicate those. And I mean, they do have considerable bravery for doing so. I will give them that. It doesn't make you clever, and it doesn't make you examine something that everyone has already looked over hundreds of times without doing the exact same thing. When they're driving away in the car, there we get a helicopter shot of the car, and one of these buildings' roofs have names of police brutality victims that are done to the song of Hell You Tombout by Janelle Monáe, right down to the fact that say their names are on the building. And I got news for you guys. The racist individuals that you are complaining about, they do say their names on Fox News when they claim that nothing wrong happened, which is bullshit. Something wrong did happen, but seriously, this whole idea of saying their names, remembering their names, people do already, and nothing's getting resolved. And look, it's obviously true that there are police officers who have been taught racism by their family members or have seen so many stereotypical criminals act in such a reprehensible way that they decide to see every person they come across on duty as that type of stereotype. And it is obviously wrong. But I mean, when you take a short like this that is clearly geared towards the people who already agree with you politically, who are already going to like the movie and agree with the message, why are you talking down to them like they're complete utter morons, like this is a preaching sermon? Because you're not going to reach anyone. You're not going to reach the people who disagree with you, because not even 5 minutes in, they're already going to check out. And if they even see the poster, which is a black man in a hoodie and a white police officer, if they're racist, what do you think the odds are that they're actually going to watch the short? It was so painfully obvious, right down to the fact that the theme song is "That's Just the Way It Is," which nothing is that simple. Nothing. Not even something as complicated as racism.
When I heard that song, I started laughing because I remember Pierce Hawthorne from Community going, "Greendale's the way it is."
Yeah,
that was but no, I do think that the camera wasn't over. I think the short looked overly polished. If you were going for this type of tone, it looks bright and shiny and it's color graded and it looks great, but you want to portray something more gritty and dark. I think the tone of Feeling Through would have fit better in this, the more mundane in this, a tone like that, the lack of sound design, the lack of anything so you can focus on the story. It just meanders. It just, like, I think at a certain point we understand the violence is there, but how are we better than the media if we keep showing the violence without offering hope? If we keep showing racism, death, murder, all this stuff, but we don't offer a single ounce of hope, we have done nothing to increase the cycle. We've worsened the cycle because now it's everyone is racist. Everyone is racist. Not that we don't know that everyone's not racist. And if you are susceptible to media, some people are very susceptible to what the news tell them, whether they're right, left, centrist, Green Party, you name it, anything. You could be a flat earther. People are very susceptible to what media tells them. So someone goes, my biggest issue is someone goes and watch this short, and every time they see a white cop, now they think every white cop is racist. And that's not true. And that's why that's the same view we're having. And we can't have the views that every black person is a criminal, that every person did, every Asian spread corona. We can't have the views that every white cop is racist. We have to think, I've never met this person. Maybe I shouldn't judge them. Maybe I should make an opinion. And I think if this short had ended on a ray of hope, a way to say, look, maybe we can change. Maybe we can do this. I think Rocky IV did a better job of handling racism. I'm just going to say it. Rocky IV is about Russia versus the US. They go, they hate each other. One of them killed each other. They don't like each other. They get in the match. It's cartoony. They have montages, but you can really sense the hate. But at the end, Rocky says, if you can change, I can change. And that's what this short is missing. It's missing the change. If you want to show the victims, you want to show that, I respect that. You want to show the way people died, I respect that. But show the hope, show the change. There is hope, there is change. And if you deny it, You just are going back to that cycle and contributing to the negativity that we have on every news channel, on every site, on every Facebook post that no one looks and says, oh, I agree with that, on every tweet that someone retweets because they think they're right, on every piece of hate that the Jack Snyder cult is putting on people, on everything. You have to be the change. Your film has to be the change. Your film has to say something that fuck, life sucks, but there is a glimmer of hope.
There are so many quotes from Black people who have lived through the civil rights movement that basically go against what we're being taught nowadays. And oddly enough, that's the reason they're so true. Like, the movie claims that it ends on a glimmer of hope when he says, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this guy, but I will deal with it because I have a life and I'm going to go buy it, which that's the closest thing we get to a glimmer of
But
hope.
they didn't need to say that. We get that.
They completely
waking up again. And
they also
anything, I get the metaphor they're doing by him closing his eyes. He's closing his eyes to violence and he's just going to let it happen. I get that. But if he opens his eyes, walks out and smiles and maybe hugs the cop or does something, or maybe he even waits longer, or he does something entirely different, or he goes and he has that conversation again, but the conversation goes different. There's so many ways you could add hope. And I get people are despaired, and I get that people don't like this. But at the end of the day, the media is the one pinpointing A against B, C against D. You can't be this if you're this. You can't be this if you're this. You can't agree on this point if you're in this political party. The media is the one pinning us against each other, the government and the media. The government does nothing to help it because they're busy trying to pay bills and $1 billion of debt. The media says, here is the extreme left and here is the extreme right. If we went in between, no one would watch because of ratings. News is about ratings. This is about ratings. This is about showing a specific view without hope to get people who are already riled up about it, more riled up about it so they can agree more. You need to show the hope. You need that. And not just from a phrase that you could have explained by having him walk out the door with a smile on his face. That's lazy filmmaking. That's exposition. I hate exposition. I hate monologues and narrations. Unless you're fucking Lord of the Rings, you don't narrate shit, okay? You don't. You just let the audience see. Show, not tell. I don't know where they went to school. I don't know what filmmaking principles they learned, but just every dynamic they use to tell this just makes me a little angry. And people will be like, well, that guy's racist now. I'm like, well, whatever. You can think what you want, but I just wanted to have hope. That's what I want. Let's
yeah. And like Charles Barkley flat out said it like a few weeks ago, division is what gets politicians elected. So like, why is it not a complete shock that the past 2 years, the political spectrum has been talking exclusively about race? And don't get me wrong, all of the arguments, all the major arguments are stupid. The Republican idea that there is no systemic racism going on, that's bullshit. Democrats saying that it's everywhere. I doubt that it's everywhere. A lot of places, absolutely, but fucking everywhere? I mean, come on. I mean, look at how many... It's really hard to describe, and I don't really know what the solutions are. I've heard Denzel Washington, when he was asked if the system was rigged, he said, yeah. And so what? What are you going to do? You're just going to give up? Just do the best you can do. Or Morgan Freeman, when Chris Wallace asked him, how do we fix this? And this is going to sound ridiculous, but he does make a good point. Morgan Freeman goes, stop talking about it. I'll stop calling you a white man, and I will ask you to stop calling me a black man. And it's just like, how the fuck does nobody know this? Like, Sidney Poitier said that 40 some years ago. He said to his dad, you see yourself as a black man, I see myself as a man. I mean, honestly, there are other solutions that people are just so fucking unwilling to try. And like, the one thing I can say about this short that's better than the news is that the news doesn't show a dead body bleeding out the country of Africa, because there is that one shot where his puddle of blood coming out of his head is shaped like the African continent. The police car has like that 3-letter motto that's like codenamed for CPR, which that was a fucking
I just think you could have done this short a lot cleverer. I think you could have had the time travel and you could have had the cop. But what if it was different cops? What if it was different situations? What if it was different ways and everything is handled in way? There's a positive, there's a negative, there's two negative, there's a positive. What if you have different cops? What if he keeps coming across this cop every time something happens and they eventually come to a, there's so many ways you could have handled this. But
in my opinion, the whole short should have just been like the car conversation over and over and over again.
That would have been great. I
mean, seriously, he wakes up from his nightmare, he writes down the notes, he studies them, and then he finds ways to take this guy down. I mean, really.
I think it could, if people would listen to each other and try to build relationships instead of getting mad at each other, or not, or if people are having conversations and listening, we solve problems. Whether it's racism, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's you don't get along in a kitchen or you're walking down the street and someone bumps into you with a cup of coffee. You listen and you conversate. Maybe you don't agree. You're not mad at each other and you don't hate each other for it. So our second last short is En Leva, or White Eyes. What are your thoughts on this one, Tyler? I don't know what to think about this one.
Well, this is one of those shorts that really sneaks up on you because, for starters, it slowly reveals itself as a short that was filmed entirely in one continuous take. And when I realized that they were going for that approach, my eyes were constantly glued on screen because I was looking for so many details in the foreground or background to look at in case they were foreshadowing something. I was actually waiting for them to cut away at one point, kind of like Birdman, where when they do cut away, it's strictly for dramatic effect to really pack an emotional punch. And the fact that they cover this one small section of a street, but they go through multiple different locations that all look different, but also similar to one another, really makes the entire effort of this 20-minute to 30-minute short feel incredibly seamless, because there's so many characters who go in and out from a certain location, some of them even in vehicles. There's an entire one where they go through half the entire street and then through a building, and you kind of can't really tell the difference because the graffiti on all the walls is so very specific, but they all look incredibly different from one another. So it really just goes to show the amount of cultural differences that the short is trying to basically visualize and express to audiences who aren't familiar with what's going on in Israel right now. But in any case, the technique is extremely well, and the cast and crew make it look incredibly easy. But for me, the most impressive aspect of the short is the acting, because every cast member has to portray a character with equally positive and negative aspects. Because for those who don't know, White Eye is a long take short about this gentleman who finds his stolen bike a month later outside of this restaurant or butchery, whatever it is, because they
near
don't
the
make
gym,
it.
I guess. But it's near the gym by the butcher, the meat place.
Yeah, like there is a butcher shop in there. There's allegedly a bar with a rock show going on, because over and over again, this guy is going through multiple different people who might have saws to take off the locks. He keeps calling the police, but because he does skimp on certain details, whether or not he actually filed a complaint, how he knows for sure that this bike is specifically his, because he does have a story that he enunciates in the exact same sentence over and over again. There were so many times, like in the first 5 minutes, where I just sat there, I'm like, are you fucking with us? Because you're being a little sketchy. And like, he doesn't offer that much evidence to really explain whether or not it is his bike. But then once that stuff's over, once you start to wonder if he's actually the real bike thief in the situation, out comes this one employee who claims to own the bicycle because he bought it from some guy at a bus station. And when you hear the supposed thieves' side of the story, you do get the sense that the two people who are quarreling over this bicycle have very similar circumstances, that they can't get to one location from another, whether it be work, school, or family, without this bicycle. But the thief has a bit of an emotional advantage because he does have a family he has to support. The one thing that he notices with the bicycle is that there's a baby seat, which he's incredibly confused by. And when I saw the baby seat, a part of me wondered if he was like a deadbeat dad or something before the other guy claiming to own the bike shows up. And the main character, even though he is unreliable, once they bring up the conflict between the two of them and they get the police involved, and this employer who vouches for the supposed thief incredibly, it becomes a lot more complicated, but he still becomes a lot more identifiable because you do realize the short doesn't show us what happens when the bike gets stolen. It doesn't show us when he actually finds it. So there's a little bit left up to imagination over how much his life has gotten more difficult without this bicycle and how he's gotten to the point where he's incredibly frustrated and wants to involve as many people as he can without really thinking the situation through. So you know that he's in a dilemma that makes him a bit of a scumbag character, but you understand the stress that he's going through. There's one thing that really bugged me about the short, and it came from reading the synopsis. This is what the official synopsis is. A man finds his stolen bicycle and now it belongs to a stranger. In his attempts to regain the bicycle, he struggles to remain human. Now, Josh, I don't know if you realize this, but if you buy a stolen bicycle from some guy at the bus station, it belongs to you now, and
Yes,
the other guy has
correct.
to pay
But I
for that.
understand
Because,
what they're trying to do with this short, and there's a really deep meaning. Really, so the first thing I thought it was just a stolen bicycle piece. But it is definitely not just a stolen bicycle piece. This thing goes to many levels without telling you, and I appreciate that. It's surface level if you want it to be, because this is what I believe the short is about. I believe this is about the divide in the Middle East. The bicycle represents the land and everything they're fighting over, the rights, the racism, everything. And so it's very clear and evident to me, first and foremost, when he calls the cops and says, "This is my bicycle," they show up. He walks over to them, they come, and he says, "This is my bicycle," and they do that. And when he goes to shake their hand, and when he goes to shake the hand again of the lady who runs the meatpacking plant, he says, "I'm sorry, I'm religious." Boom. So there you go. You've already created a divide. Then you already have her on one side, and this is a very simple meaning, obviously, saying, no, I believe him, I believe her. You have this sort of neutral party going between. And this is really showing, and at the end, and this is, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is about racial divide and borders and land and stuff and fighting over this, because he cuts the bicycle in half when he actually is a bicycle
That's
thief.
right. That's right.
And he grinds it and he just cuts it in half, basically cutting the divide, realizing what he has done. The one impactful moment is where he sees people hiding in the freezer. And as soon as everyone's gone, they just leave. Because where are these? And it's very similar to when you have immigrants' boats coming up to various countries, like when boats of immigrants would come up to Vancouver. Where do you go? You can't go anywhere. You just are. And I think this short does a really good job of painting a picture about a guy who wants to steal a bicycle, who makes up a really good story eventually. But it does have these undertones of this that's not completely in your face. They have a little bit of it for sure when they're near the cop car and he's like, "What are you going to do with him?" "Oh, we're just going to do this," and question him. But I think the symbolism in the hooker who keeps coming back and forth, she comes back and forth 3 or 4 times, getting in different cars. Sort of, it's the same old story. By saying it's the same old story, by showing it's repeating itself, it's clever without being in your face. And I think that's what this short does. I think this does a better job of showing race than the Two Distant Strangers, because it's subtle. It tells you, it uses an object to tell the story. You could watch this no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, because you see people arguing over a bicycle. You're like, oh, that could be a pretty good short. I love the way this is shot with the movement, as you mentioned. The lighting is excellent, going from more brighter at the beginning to the light bulb burning out, if you notice, and making this more bleak street as you get farther on. I like the ending on this because it gives you nothing. You know he was the thief, but you see that he had a change of heart by cutting the bicycle in half and changing his views on other people, changing his views on thievery, becoming a better person. It's so subtle. Unless you were looking for it, you're not going to see it. And I think that's why this works. And I think that's why this got past the Israeli Film Board, because you can't be blatantly in someone's face about this. You couldn't make a Two Distant Strangers in Israel or any of these countries. Even going to some European countries and such, people just don't want to discuss certain subjects. But what they do is they do it in such a way you're learning without realizing. And that's what we need to do with our shorts.
Absolutely. And it's funny you bring the Israeli Film Board up. Like, similar thing happened in China. Like, when Nomadland got nominated for everything, China's like, "Hey, Chloe Zhao, she's our girl." And then all of a sudden they discovered an interview from 2013 where Chloe Zhao, rightly so, points out how Chinese government brings up a lot of lies, and it's just like, oh, so that's how it's going to be. Okay, well, we're going to censor your name and your movie everywhere. And it's just like, wow, fucking babies.
But I like the subtlety of this. I think the subtlety makes this work. It's a simple story about an object, but it has more to say. But it doesn't say that in your face. It's not in your face. It's not, I would compare, like, this is sort of the subtlety of Genius Loki. On the animated short, because you can take it at surface level. It has a unique art style, it has a diverse cast, but it also allows you to look deeper and interpret it. And you could just do this as interpretive between accusing people. You could interpret this to be pretty much anything, but it has that ability to tell a story. And you couldn't pinpoint down that it's about this, this, and this. You could say, oh no, it's about this. Oh no, it's about this. Everyone's going to have a different opinion. But that's the genius of this. It lets you decide. It lets the audience think. It's not hammering it in your fucking head. I like that.
Yeah, and what you were saying about the bike owner actually being the thief, I wouldn't have thought of that, mainly because when he does go to the ATM, he hadn't really discovered the migrant workers yet. And I don't know why. I just got the sense that he would have went to the AMT and got the money anyways. But it also serves into your theory, because when he's going through the restaurant, he could just make a break for it and then discover the workers. And he's just like, shit, maybe I should pay up. So it definitely suits that theory just as much.
Yeah, it's honestly probably the most fascinating on this list. I don't think it wins, though. I don't think it wins.
No, probably not.
And I don't think this last one wins either. The letter.
Really?
The letter room. What do you think of the letter room?
You know what? I actually had the most amount of hesitation going into that one, just because people had so many high expectations about it, given the fact that it was starring someone as huge in the film industry as Oscar Isaac now. And I started to wonder, after everything that happened with Two Distant Strangers, which is like a big budget short film, it was made by Netflix and everything, and there were certain actors and musicians from the industry, I got a little worried that it might repeat itself. But then I found out that the writer and director of the short, Elvira Lind, is actually the wife of Oscar Isaac, and that this was a project the two of them had been working on. So I got a little less anxious and more open-minded about it. And I would say that this is my second favorite of the shorts. I really like what a small, intimate story this is about a prison officer who finds a very unconventional way of finding common ground with prisoners he thought he knew, and then discovers certain things about them that he just wouldn't have guessed. And it makes him really put his life and their short lives, because a good chunk of them on death row, into perspective. It's just that I was pleasantly surprised that a story like this, which I thought was going to be like really heavy and drenched in social commentary, was more of a slice of life story comparable to Nomadland or Roma, with the pacing and the structure of the overall conflict. I do like that we find a way to really empathize with a prison officer who is really close friends with a lot of these prisoners before he starts to invade their privacy. You get the sense that through his much more compassionate, energetic, and optimistic attitude when he's at his job, compared to the much more quiet and lonely side of his own personal life, you really do get the sense that he does legitimately believe that people can mend their ways and improve upon their own mistakes as long as they're willing to prove it. But at the same time, with his own personal life, he really can identify with the loneliness and isolation. And in my opinion, that's what really makes you understand what he's going through, even though he's technically invading their privacy in a practice that I have absolutely no idea if opening and scanning these letters are legal. I wouldn't be surprised if certain states do allow this, because America, what can you say?
Well, he wasn't supposed to read most of the letters. He was just supposed to scan for keywords. So technically he was breaking his job there, just a bit.
Yeah, but like, once he's like skimming through the pages, once you see him reading them out loud or imagining their voices as he's reading alongside them, you really get the sense that he's starting to connect with these people a hell of a lot more. And Oscar Isaac, in so many scenes, just staring at a computer, listening to what these people are writing down and connecting with them, just for his facial expressions, did such a good job that this is honestly one of my new favorite performances of his. Not my absolute favorite.
I didn't even
It's
recognize him in this role, to be honest. Like I knew it was Oscar Isaac, but he didn't sound or look like Oscar Isaac.
yeah, he
That's good
puts
acting. That's right there. That's good acting.
yeah, he puts on an accent that I thought was a little weird at first. I thought it was an attempt to make him seem a little more isolated compared to the other prisoners who are just your stereotypical Americans. I thought that was a weird touch, but like I got used to it over time and it did make him sound a lot more vulnerable, especially during a pivotal scene where he actually makes contact with a prisoner's loved one. And when that happened, I was expecting something incredibly Oscar baity, like when they start screaming, they start snapping at each other, and he becomes a much more closed-minded, hateful person that you would associate with a prison officer, because they do imply that when people get pissy with him, he starts to act just as pissy. But no, it was handled in such a mature and subdued fashion where the two of them, even though they're in a way kind of mad at each other, the victim's loved one for basically invading privacy and the other one for not really conveying the amount of feelings that she should towards her loved one, they do find common ground. They have a very peaceful and surprisingly intense conversation because you're constantly sitting there waiting for one of them to say the wrong thing and then turn into that Oscar baity moment. But thankfully, it never happened. It was much more lighthearted and optimistic than I thought it was going to be. And that was one of the reasons I was pretty hesitant to watch the live action shorts when you brought them up, because I always associate live action short films as being much more stoic and serious as opposed to the more playful aspect of the animation shorts, which ironically is what makes the animation shorts a hell of a lot more impressive any year, let alone this year. Because
There have
for
been
one,
the previous year, just not this year.
yeah, I know they've won. Like that one stand-up comedian Stephen Wright, he won an Oscar for a live action short, which really say that out loud. But I don't know, like with animation, part of it is just because animation's more expensive. They have less time to tell a story, which is also why they emphasize it more on visual storytelling as opposed to dialogue. But that also does work to its advantage. I feel like animated shorts are a lot better in quality because they have less to work with as opposed to live action shorts where it's not that you have a lot to work with inherently, because 20 to 30 minutes still costs a lot to make, but people are more open-minded to check those kinds of shorts out just because they cover real life subjects that we tackle every single day.
The one, this was actually the one I had least to say about. I don't like the shakiness of the camera at the computer scenes. I didn't see why it was necessary.
That's
He's
true.
just
It
sitting
does
there and
it
it's
does
moving
switch.
just a little bit, just a tiny bit, and I'm like, why is it moving? What is it trying to prove? And I thought maybe it's but I couldn't think of a decent reason of why the camera would be moving. Like I understand the movement and the walking shots and all that, but get a gimbal, stabilize your damn shot. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
There are
that
filters for
is
that. I like the ambiguous ending there they have, where after he talks to the person who's writing to someone on death row and she says, why would I write him any different? And she's pregnant. He gives a letter to the guy who wanted a letter. I think that she's writing him now, and I sort of like that. Because if she's
yeah, I do I do
cute.
like that.
I like that. That's really nice. And the joy on his face, that's really neat. I think there was room for trimming here. I think it was more of the creator putting something out there with exactly what they wanted to create as opposed to what was the best version of the product. I don't see how him having dinner in full details and frying zucchini really added anything to the story. You could have had him sitting there eating easily enough and feeding the dog. I think that shows enough of his life without, we don't need to know that he's using a Greek marinade sauce on his rice that he had in the microwave. I just feel like that was a little unnecessary. And it didn't really add anything to the story. I was just like, okay, I guess he likes food. Well, I do too, but that doesn't make it more relatable for me. I like the moment in his car when he throws away the cup. I like that. That's a cool character moment, that he's careful, and that's good. But I don't think he needs to fry zucchini. That's my biggest critique of this. You could have
Well,
cut
I
that 30
mean,
seconds.
Well, I mean, once you say that, like instantly, once I thought of that, it's just like, well, okay, yeah, one shot of him eating dinner all by himself
Yeah.
with a small dog would definitely convey the loneliness. But in my opinion, adding that one bit of him like putting meticulous detail into his cooking, in my opinion, that just goes to show that he wants to try to find more joy in his life and find more passion by being more careful about what you do when you cook stuff, which is something that I've experienced a lot of the past year. I've gotten more meticulous in my cooking, watching like Food Network shows. When I still had my job at Perimeter, we had these weekly food challenges that I would take semi seriously because there were rules that we had to abide by. And I did win a couple. I won one by putting cooked spaghetti and a few other things into a waffle iron and making this like chicken parm in the oven, so it would basically be a chicken parm waffle. I saw that on Triple D Takeout, and when my dad and I saw just how insane it was and how many ingredients you can use in your own house to make that dish, we looked at each other and it's just like, hey, we're doing that, right? Hell yeah, this would fit into my Food Network challenge.
I guess you could go with the detail. I just feel like you could have trimmed five minutes from this.
Oh, totally.
If you tightened it up, it would have been better. I like the overall story. I like Oscar Isaac's performance. The direction is very good. There's just a lot of extra there. Stabilize your camera and really tighten that up, because it was I think it was 29 minutes or something. Tighten that up to a solid.
I think it was 30.
Solid. Tighten it up to a solid 25 then. I just felt you could have tightened it up. Like, even when I'm going through my edits, like, I got one piece that I'm working on that I'm leaving as a full edit just for the length, just for the experience. But if I was to tighten it up, I'd cut 40 minutes of that. It's more just for me. It's the director's cut. It's just something I want in there. But my cut I'm putting out to people, there's lines I have in movies, scenes, little bits and pieces, character moments that just don't make the cut that I love. I make a director's cut for me. And I think that's really what just needed to happen with this. I do think it's a pretty decent one. I think that Feeling Through is going to take this.
You think so?
I think Feeling Through wins the Oscar. I'd love it to be present. I think it's the most creative and most heartwarming one here, with glimmers of hope. And I like that. You're not completely sad the whole time. You feel good. But I feel like Feeling Through offers a lot of perspective, a very well done, minus technically, but technically doesn't always mean you win or not. But I think the story is the strongest and the simplest. So I think people can relate to this, because I think that Two Distant Strangers is going to definitely draw divide signs in the land. So that one's out. I think that White Eye, because it's a foreign film, really just sort of kicks out anything. And I think The Letter Room is just a little too long and not as tight as it could be. So I think that Feeling Through takes this, and Present is a close second.
That's interesting, because when I did see Two Distant Strangers, I'm just like, this has the check marks for everything audiences of this spectrum are looking for. And those audiences do watch the Oscars and make the most complaints that the Academy addresses. So I feel like it does have a chance just based on that. And it feels awkward saying that. Like, I don't want any of these shorts to be bad. None of us do. No, that should really go without saying. But of course,
it's the Oscars.
Yeah, but I mean, there's always someone who's not going to listen to that aspect of it.
But I mean, if you look at overly preachy movies about respect and racism and such, I mean, look at Detroit with John Boyega. That was
I like that one. I like Detroit.
I liked it, but it didn't win anything. These political statements don't win. Human stories do.
I don't know about that, but
well, I mean, what was last year's animated short?
That's actually a really good question. I mean, there have been shorts about deaf and hard of hearing characters that have won best live action short. There was one about a social worker who's like teaching a 4-year-old girl sign language, but the parents want her to teach her to speak because they're too lazy to get off their asses. And like that short was pretty decent. And it definitely helped that the filmmakers, when they won the Oscar, signed the entire speech out of respect for the lead actress. So that part was definitely cool. And I feel like if Feeling Through wins, they're definitely going to bring up Madeline and her interpreter and the other filmmakers, because Doug Roland also has a documentary about how he made the short, which I haven't seen, but I'm willing to bet there are some decent aspects to it, namely how they got the actor to play Artie, because Artie is played by an actual deafblind person.
Yeah,
but
I I just feel like it doesn't like it will make an impact to a certain group of people, but it's not going to hit everyone. It needs to be something that everyone can relate to. And I feel like the most relatable thing is homelessness and being blind or deaf to issues. And I feel like that's general, it's general enough that the Academy will say this is impactful, but we don't have to hit on anything too major because the Academy has never been, they'll nominate it, but it's not going to win. That's just how it is.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I have issue with the Academy's new rules. Everyone thinks it's that like more diverse actors are going to win, and it's just like, I don't know about that. I mean, the rules just say at least one person, at least a few people have to be nominated, which don't get me wrong, that would be great. It's just, are they going to win? And if they don't, what happens then? Do we keep complaining or do we keep like looking for an answer? So I feel like Two Distant Strangers or The Letter Room are kind of personal front runners, but I would love if Feeling Through would win because it was such a simple story told in a much more unique fashion than casual audiences are used to. And because the Academy is full of people who are not casual audiences, they're definitely going to easily connect with this short. It's just that I've gotten so cynical over whether or not people really judge things based on talent or based on what they stand for. So that's really the only reason I went with the other two as possible for front runners. Like if Letter Room wins, I'm not going to complain.
I'm not going to be
upset. I
had
a really good time.
I'm not going to be upset.
It's all subjective. And that's the problem with awards. Everyone gets this sense that like once you win an award, you are seen as top shit by society, which sometimes that is true, but it really depends on which awards. Like when everyone freaked out about James Corden getting nominated for The Prom, it's just like, what fucking difference does it make? It's a Golden Globe. Even if he wins, he's not going to be hailed as a hero or anything. It's a fucking piece of plastic with gold spray paint. Like anybody can fucking win that.
I think it might be like a titanium alloy, maybe, or like aluminum.
You get the point.
I do think that the Oscars, what the Oscar means to a lot of people is recognition for their work. And I think even if you get nominated, there's that out of everything that came out this year, everything, all 200 movies or 400 and all the shorts and all this, I appreciate the effort for my hard work. I mean, let me tell you, if I'm ever nominated for an Oscar, one, the world has gone down the tubes and I made it famous somehow. But I would lose my mind because I don't even care about winning at this point. I'm just glad that someone watched what I did. And I think that's what the Oscar means, because then that's opportunity for you. That's people are like, you go to an audition, you go to this, they need a director, you submit your resume. Oh, I was Oscar nominated. They're like, oh, there's just that level of prestige that says, you have the talent, you have the skill, and it's a recognition for hard work. And I think anyone in any of these categories, I mean, even costume designers, I've seen costume designers get emotional because they spent all their time and money and effort to make costumes, and it's their heart and soul, and boom, it's out there. And they're like, someone noticed the costumes I did. I love that. I think it's more the recognition. I think people think it makes you hot shit, but it's more a personal achievement to win an Oscar, because very few people can say they've won or nominated for an Oscar. It's a very small group. So it's that level of, I did it. I actually did it.
Absolutely. Like there's obviously a certain level of prestige. I mean, would M. Night Shyamalan have been allowed to make the last Airbender movie that he had if he wasn't nominated for The Sixth Sense? No, probably not. Would the guy who directed Mary Poppins Returns be allowed to actually make something unique of a Disney remake if he wasn't screwed out of an Oscar because the Academy decided to give the best director to Polanski that year? Yeah, he probably wouldn't have. So like, it's not
Disney remake did he do?
Well, like he did Mary Poppins Returns, and it like looking at it so many times, I just sat there. I'm like, no one other than an Oscar nominee could have been allowed to do the exact shit that happens here if it wasn't him. But also at the same time, it's not a guarantee. Everyone points to Diablo Cody winning for Juno, and then she got her script for Jennifer's Body. And it's just like, do you guys even remember the production problems that went through Jennifer's Body? How the guys were all convinced that the movie should be marketed to teenage girls as opposed to anything else, and that's what had it bomb in the first place. And
that would work well.
all of a sudden rediscovered Jennifer's Body as a legitimately good horror comedy. Because yeah, it is.
Yeah, I enjoy that movie.
It's just like Oscars and consideration and awards consideration they're not bulletproof from people interfering with your work. And I feel like people have this sense that it does.
I mean, there is that other level of it where you can be Oscar nominated so many times that you don't make the best films anymore. You don't have the creative control. You don't have that same level of that, like, I will put Spielberg here. Spielberg was amazing through the 70s and 80s and into the 90s and early 2000s. But after he kept getting Oscar nominated for everything, we end up with a lot of movies that are okay, that are really good, but they're not Oscar level. Like, I like Bridge of Spies. I think Mark Rylance is good in Bridge of Spies. I don't know if it was Oscar worthy, though. I think it's still a pretty good film, but I think because he has been nominated for so many things, people just automatically think it's good. And that goes for anything. I think
so it's the Meryl Streep effect.
The Meryl Streep effect. Yes, they'll nominate Meryl Streep for anything. They'll nominate what's her name for anything. Trying to think. Emma Thompson. Emma Thompson's been nominated a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, those were for pretty particular. They
nominated her for Children's Act. I don't know if you saw Children's Act, but Children's Act is not an Oscar-worthy nomination. It's just her playing a judge. She feels like Emma Thompson. It's not great.
Are you sure she got an Oscar for that? An Oscar nom for that?
I will Google it, but I'm fairly sure because I was mad that year. Because I'm like, this movie's okay. It's a fine movie. It's a decent performance.
Wait, it's called Children's Act. Children's Act or The Children Act?
The Children Act. It's a 2017 film with Stanley Tucci. But he got an Oscar nomination for.
Really? I don't see anything here about it.
Well, I thought it was.
I mean, it wouldn't have been a huge surprise. I think everyone was like rooting for her at that point.
Let me just see here. But it's just, there's that level of you're good now. There's no room to fall. There's no room for failure. And I think that creates a very unreal expectation. I think that gives us to, I love La La Land. I love Whiplash, but First Man just didn't perform, but it still got an Oscar nomination because the other ones had been previously Oscar nominated. I
don't know if that was the reason behind it. I mean, I'll admit, I don't like First Man compared to the first two, but First Man compared to other biopics is still really top notch.
Yes, but it's a good film. There's nothing wrong with it. You can watch it. It's an all right film, but I don't think it's Oscar level. You get this sort of, oh, you won an Oscar before, we should nominate you. And really what they should be nominating for the Oscars is your film studio, whoever you are, should look and say, what do we have that's the best? Maybe we don't know who you are. Maybe it's your first film. Maybe it's an indie film. Maybe it's an action film that blew expectations and it was just groundbreaking. You nominate what is the best, not what has been nominated before.
Well, here's the problem. What's considered the best depends on each individual person. And I think that's where all of these ridiculous arguments come in, where we refuse to understand why someone else might see a movie we hate as being the absolute best. Like, I don't like Spirited Away, but it makes total sense why anyone would. And it makes total sense why anyone would consider it Oscar worthy. The animation is really top notch. And it does cover a lot of environmental and colonialism themes that are still a big issue in today's era. I just don't think, it's just my own personal preference that I don't think the movie really explores those things all that well. And I also don't think the character development, as much as people really love to praise it, I don't really think it's all that great either. But I'm not going to act like the characters don't have 3-act structures where they change over the course of it. And that is why people love it so much. They're just arcs that, for whatever reason, didn't interest me. And I feel like people are so quick to simplify their subjective opinions as if they are facts. I mean, I spent like a 2-day war on my YouTube comment section because some Treasure Planet loving dipshit was so pissed off that I loved Atlantis but didn't like Treasure Planet because they came out in like that same time frame.
And I like Treasure Planet. I didn't love it. It was pretty cool because it was pirates that are spacey. I like that. But
yeah,
but
like,
blow my mind.
But yeah, like one of my longtime subscribers, one of what used to be my favorite YouTubers, because he doesn't really do it that much anymore, Jack Wickham chimed in. It's just like, subject an opinion, a form of subjectivity. Fucking learn it. And then the last word was the guy that was complaining to me, going like, if people hear these themes over and over again by the same large amount of people, then it's considered fact. And it's just like,
Wait. Just
yeah,
because you say something doesn't mean it's right.
yeah, like the majority of a popular majority saying something that they believe to be true doesn't make it true. And that's the big fucking problem with
If
the
that's the case,
Oscars.
Tyler, the government says we don't matter every single day. We matter.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
more important than the government cronies. Sorry, government. Actually, I'm not sorry.
No, you're not.
Trying to be funny. We've been talking about so much politics lately. It's
yeah, which is the other. That's the other reason I wasn't really looking forward to live action shorts. Like they shove in a lot of political stuff, and because it is a short film, there's a lot more pressure for you to convey your message in as quick of an amount of time. And stuff like The President and White Eye definitely accomplished that. And of course, I think Two Distant Strangers' other big issue is that there still hasn't really been much of a resolution in any of the cases that they parallel in real life.
People aren't willing to talk or have conversations. They just want to take their sides and hope the other side changes.
That was the other thing Mackie said in his interview. He said that people don't talk enough about perception when it comes to racial profiling. They don't talk about stereotypes when it comes to racial profiling, because as much as we hate to admit it, there are stereotypes that exist. It's not a good thing. And if we could get rid of them entirely, that would be fucking awesome. But life just does not work that way. And he also said that if we don't talk about these things, we're doing our youth a huge disservice, because they're not going to be able to figure out how to deal with it if they're the ones who get caught in the crossfire.
Mm-hmm. Well, on a lighter note, check out Really Bad TV's episode. Rachel Ray takes a tree vow of silence or something. I don't know. It's a very long, confusing title. It has a Rachel Ray parody. It's very, very funny. It's great. We've got that out now. You can check out Community Cast. You can check out our improv with the Josh and Tyler show cast, plus Elisa and our Chance host. We are going to have Suits and Cinema. Do you love Bond? Check out Bond on our channel. We talked about Dr. No this week. Great place to start. A good foundation for the film, but we all have varying opinions, so it's going to be delightful. Also, I don't agree with the warning that it's racist. I'm sorry. This was the 60s. You employed a bunch of people. It's ridiculous. Why is there a warning on Dr. No on Crave? I do not understand.
Wait,
maybe I'm just
Crave puts out warnings.
Crave has a warning on Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger. They just put it on all the Bond movies.
I sat for a half hour of Lawrence of Arabia. There was no warning. It's just like, hey, Obi-Wan Kenobi has makeup that makes him look really awkward and fucking creepy.
Well, I don't know. Someone's super concerned about their reputation, so that's always fun. And we will have all our shows throughout the week. We've got shorts from the previous episode coming out there. Check out Tyler's channel. He's got some new reviews coming your way. Check out his DuckTales video. He's got all your Oscar coverage. If you missed any of the Oscar pictures, Minari, Nomadland, any of the big ones, check it out. Tyler Wolf, 2S for fucking fantastic on YouTube there. Great video documentaries. That's it for the Josh and Tyler show. Join us next time when we don't talk about politics. I think I have a fun topic for next week, but we'll discuss that in a minute. Tyler, say something awesome.
Fucking talk to each other so that we can learn from each other and get along with each other. Please.
If you listen, you might not be so ignorant. That's it. We'll see you next week.